Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest. It was a typical Tuesday morning, the kind that slips into the rhythm of the week without fanfare. I was perched at my sleek glass desk in my sunlit home office, the scent of freshly brewed espresso lingering in the air as I sipped from a ceramic mug, its warmth seeping into my palms. At 39, I'd carved out a life of quiet predictability. My days filled with the steady hum of work as a freelance graphic designer, my evenings spent with a glass of red wine and a good book. The large window beside me framed a view of the bustling city below, the distant honk of cars and the soft rustle of leaves in the autumn breeze, a familiar soundtrack to my routine. After my long-term relationship ended 3 years ago, I'd convinced myself that passion, romance, all of that was a chapter I'd left behind. I was content, or so I thought, until that morning when a single phone call shattered the fragile illusion of my carefully ordered world. I was halfway through editing a client's logo, my fingers dancing across the keyboard, when my phone buzzed against the desk, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen, a flicker of unease stirring in my chest. I rarely answered unknown calls, too many telemarketers, but something, a restless curiosity, urged me to pick up. "Hello?" I said, my voice cautious, a little sharper than I intended, as I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly beneath me. "Hi, is this Lena Harper?" The voice on the other end was deep, smooth, and laced with a professional warmth that sent a shiver down my spine. My heart skipped a beat, a strange mix of recognition and confusion washing over me. I knew that voice, but I couldn't place it. Not yet. "Yes, speaking," I replied, my fingers tightening around the phone, my pulse quickening as I braced myself for what might come next. "Lena, it's Julian Carter," he said, and my breath caught in my throat. Julian Carter, my client, the creative director of a high-end fashion magazine I'd been freelancing for over the past 8 years. At 45, Julian was the kind of man who commanded attention without trying. Tall, with a chiseled jaw, dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, and hazel eyes that seemed to pierce through you with an intensity that always left me slightly unsteady. We'd worked together on countless projects, our interactions always professional, though I'd be lying if I said I hadn't noticed the way his tailored blazers hugged his broad shoulders, or the way his voice, low and resonant, seemed to linger in the air long after he spoke. But this call felt different, charged with an undercurrent I couldn't quite name. "How are you today, Lena?" he asked, his tone casual but tinged with something heavier, something that made my stomach flutter. "I'm good, just working through some designs," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the nervous excitement bubbling in my chest. "How about you, Julian?" There was a pause on the other end, a faint rustle, maybe papers shifting, or his fingers tapping against a desk, and I could almost picture him in his sleek downtown office, the city skyline stretching out behind him. The silence stretched just long enough to make me uneasy, a knot forming in my stomach as I waited for him to speak. "I'm doing well, Lena, but I wanted to talk to you about something important," he said, his voice dropping to a lower register, each word deliberate, weighted with meaning. My stomach did a little flip, a mix of anticipation and dread swirling within me. Important? We'd just wrapped up a major editorial spread for the magazine's winter issue, and I wasn't due for another project for weeks. My mind raced through a dozen possibilities, none of them good. Was he unhappy with my work? Was he ending our contract? Or was it something else entirely? "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly, a lump forming in my throat as I braced myself for bad news. There was a soft chuckle on the other end, but it wasn't lighthearted. It was tense, almost strained, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "Everything's fine, don't worry," he said, his tone reassuring but still carrying that strange weight. "Actually, it's better than fine. I think you'll be pleased to hear this." I exhaled, a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, my fingers brushing against the edge of my desk as I tried to calm my racing heart. A raise, maybe? A new project with more creative freedom? The possibilities danced in my mind, each one more enticing than the last. But something about the way he spoke, the hesitation, the careful choice of words, made me feel like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite see. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, my curiosity piqued. "What's going on?" "Well, Lena, I've been reviewing your work over the past year," he began, his voice smooth but firm, like he was choosing each word with care. "And I have to say, you've really exceeded expectations. Your designs for the winter issue were stunning. Our readers couldn't stop talking about them. So, I've got something to offer you, something I think you might be interested in." My heart raced, a spark of excitement igniting in my chest. Could this be the break I'd been waiting for? A chance to take my career to the next level? "Go on," I said, my voice breathless, my fingers tightening around the phone as I leaned forward, the sunlight streaming through the window casting a warm glow across my desk. Julian laughed, a low, rich sound that sent a jolt of heat through me, and I couldn't help but notice how different it sounded. Less professional, more intimate. "Lena, how would you feel about taking on a new role with the magazine? One that's a bit more exclusive?" he asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made my pulse quicken. A new role? Something exclusive? I hadn't even considered the possibility of a bigger role with the magazine. I'd been content as a freelancer working on my own terms. But now, with Julian's words echoing in my mind, I felt a surge of curiosity, a restless energy that made my skin tingle. "What do you mean by exclusive?" I asked, my voice tinged with excitement, my mind racing with possibilities. He chuckled again, the sound warm but laced with something deeper, something that made my breath catch. "I can't go into too many details just yet," he said, his tone teasing, almost playful. "But this role would put you in the spotlight. You'd be leading a new visual campaign for the magazine, something that could redefine our brand. It would involve a lot of travel, meetings with high-profile clients, and you'd be working directly with me." His voice lingered on that last part, the words hanging in the air like a silent invitation, and I felt a flush creeping up my neck, my skin prickling with a heat I couldn't ignore. "Wow," I breathed, my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of excitement and nervousness swirling within me. "That sounds incredible. Leading a campaign? Traveling? Working closely with Julian? It was more than I'd ever dreamed of, a chance to break free from the monotony of my routine, to stretch my wings and soar. But there was something else in his tone, something that made my stomach flutter, a subtle shift that hinted at more than just a professional opportunity. "It is," Julian said, his voice softening, a warmth in his tone that made my breath hitch. "And I think you're ready for it, Lena. You've been with us for a long time, and I believe this is the next step for you. But before I go any further, I want to make sure it's something you actually want to do. It would be a big commitment, a lot of responsibility, a lot of time. I won't lie, it's not an easy path." I leaned back in my chair, the leather cool against my skin, my mind spinning as I processed his words. A part of me was thrilled, the spark of ambition igniting within me, but another part felt a flicker of doubt. It was a lot to consider, more responsibility, more time away from home, more pressure. But when had I ever backed down from a challenge? When had I ever turned down a chance to grow? "What kind of commitment are we talking about?" I asked, my voice steady despite the nervous flutter in my stomach. Julian took a deep breath, the sound crackling through the phone, and I could almost picture him leaning forward, his hazel eyes intense, his expression serious. "It's going to require a lot of your time, Lena," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "There will be some personal sacrifices, and I need someone I can trust completely for this. No room for second guessing." I nodded, though he couldn't see it, the stakes sinking in like a heavy weight on my shoulders. But something inside me, maybe it was the thrill of being noticed, the desire to prove myself, or the quiet longing for something more, pushed me forward. "I understand," I said, my voice confident, though my mind was still racing. "I'm interested." There was another pause, longer this time, and I could feel the air between us shift, a subtle tension building that made my skin prickle. "Good," Julian said finally, his tone almost conspiratorial, a low murmur that sent a shiver down my spine. "Then I have one more thing to tell you." My heart thudded against my ribs, a mix of anticipation and unease swirling within me. This wasn't just about the job anymore. I could feel it, a subtle undercurrent that made my breath catch. "Before we proceed, Lena, I need to be honest with you about something," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, each word slow and deliberate, like he was stepping into uncharted territory. I sat up straighter, my hand tightening around the phone, my pulse racing as I braced myself for what might come next. "Of course," I replied, my voice tight with anticipation, my fingers brushing against my lips as I tried to steady my breathing. "What's going on?" He sighed, a heavy, weighted sound that seemed to carry a burden he'd been holding for far too long. "Lena, I've been following your work closely, more closely than you probably realize," he said, his voice thick with meaning, each word sending a jolt through me. "And I've noticed something about you, something special." My breath caught in my throat, my mind reeling as his words sank in. Special? I'd worked hard over the years, yes, but I'd never thought of myself as anything extraordinary, just another designer doing her job. But the way Julian said it, his tone sincere, almost intimate, made me second-guess everything I thought I knew about myself. "Julian, I appreciate the praise, but—" I started to protest, my voice trembling slightly, but he cut me off, his tone gentle but firm. "No, Lena, you need to hear me out," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to wrap around me, pulling me in despite my resistance. "I don't mean this in a professional sense alone. I'm talking about something more." My stomach flipped, a rush of heat surging through me as the realization hit me like a tidal wave. More? What did he mean by more? "More?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it through the phone. The whole situation felt surreal, like I'd stepped into a dream I couldn't wake up from. Was he suggesting something beyond a career opportunity? Was I misinterpreting his words? My mind spun, a mix of anxiety and curiosity swirling within me, my skin tingling with a heat I couldn't ignore. "Yes," he said, his voice softer now, almost confessional, each word laced with a quiet intensity that made my breath hitch. "I've been working with you for so long, Lena, and I've come to realize that you're more than just a designer to me. I see potential in you, not just in your work, but beyond that." My heart raced, my fingers tightening around the phone as I tried to make sense of his cryptic words. Beyond that? What was he saying? "Julian, I began again, my voice trembling, but he kept going, his tone taking on a raw, vulnerable edge that made my chest ache. "I know this might sound strange," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to resonate in my core, "but I've developed a deep admiration for you, not just because of your talent, but because of who you are as a person. The way you carry yourself, your creativity, your strength. There's something about you that makes me believe we could create something incredible together, if you understand what I mean." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and I felt the world around me slow to a crawl. I was trying to make sense of what he was saying, but the line between professional admiration and something more felt blurred, a delicate dance I wasn't sure how to navigate. Was I reading too much into this? Was he crossing a line? Or was there something real here, something I'd been too afraid to see until now? "I don't know what to say," I muttered, my voice soft, conflicted, my fingers brushing against my neck as I tried to steady my racing pulse. There was a part of me that wanted to dismiss his words, to retreat to the safety of my routine, but another part, a part I couldn't quite control, felt the warmth in his voice, the pull of his confession, like a flame drawing me closer. "I know it's unexpected," Julian said, his tone gentle but tinged with a quiet urgency that made my skin prickle. "And I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I just needed you to know how I feel, and I hope, maybe, you might feel the same way, even if it's just a little." My heart pounded in my chest, a wild, unsteady rhythm, and I felt a flush creeping up my chest, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Julian, my client, the man I'd worked with for 8 years, was telling me he admired me, that he saw me as more than just a colleague. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. I was 39 years old. Romance wasn't something I'd considered in years. After my breakup, I'd locked that part of myself away, convinced it was gone for good. And yet, hearing Julian's voice, the sincerity in his words, I felt something stir. A flicker of fear, yes, but also a deep, aching longing I hadn't let myself feel in so long. Julian, I don't know what to say, I admitted, my voice trembling. My fingers twisting the hem of my sweater as I tried to steady myself, the fabric soft against my skin, but doing little to calm the heat rising in my chest. This is a lot to take in. There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd said too much, if I'd pushed him away. But then his voice broke through the stillness, lighter now, as though he was giving me the space I needed. I'm not asking you to rush, Lena, he said, his tone a soothing balm against the storm in my chest. Just think about it, take your time, and when you're ready, let me know. I let out a shaky breath, my heart still racing, the weight of his words settling into me like a heavy fog. Okay, I said quietly, my mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 possibilities. I'll think about it. Julian seemed to sense my hesitation, and I could almost hear the faint smile in his voice, a warmth that made my chest ache. I knew you would, he said, his tone soft but confident. And no matter what you decide, I'll respect it. I just wanted you to know where I stand. As the call ended, I sat there in a daze, the phone still clutched in my hand, the sunlight streaming through the window casting long shadows across the floor. What had just happened? Was I being swept up in something I couldn't control, or had I just been given a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to grow, both professionally and personally? I wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. Something inside me had awakened, a quiet spark that refused to be ignored. The days after that call passed in a blur, each one more chaotic than the last. I went through the motions of my daily routine, editing designs, meeting deadlines, answering emails, but everything felt different, like I was seeing the world through a new lens. My mind kept returning to that conversation with Julian, replaying his words over and over, each syllable etched into my memory. I couldn't escape the question that had taken root in my mind. What did he really mean? And more importantly, what did I want? I found myself caught between two worlds, one where I was just a 39-year-old woman, content with her quiet life, her predictable routine, and another where I was someone Julian saw as something more. Someone with the potential to create something incredible, both in work and beyond. I couldn't ignore the feelings that had started to bloom within me, the respect I'd always had for Julian now laced with a quiet curiosity, a longing I couldn't fully identify. I noticed things I hadn't before, the way his voice had softened when he said my name, the way he'd hesitated before confessing, the way his words had made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. But as the days passed, something shifted inside me. I realized I'd been running from the very thing I feared most, the idea of stepping outside my comfort zone. I'd spent so many years being practical, following the expected path, but maybe it was time to take a leap, to embrace the unknown. After all, what was the worst that could happen? A chance at something new, something real, was worth the risk, wasn't it? I decided I needed to speak with Julian face to face. A phone call wasn't enough to unravel everything that had been set in motion. I needed clarity, and I knew I could only get it by confronting my feelings head on. I emailed him, asking if he had time to meet, my fingers trembling as I hit send, my stomach twisting with nerves. When he replied almost immediately, agreeing to meet at a quiet cafe near his office, I felt a surge of both excitement and dread. What if I said the wrong thing? What if this changed everything between us for good? The next morning, I arrived at the cafe early, my heart pounding as I paced outside, the crisp autumn air biting at my cheeks. I'd chosen a fitted black sweater and a deep burgundy scarf, the colors bold against my pale skin, a small rebellion against my usual muted tones. When I finally walked inside, the scent of roasted coffee and cinnamon filled the air, the soft hum of conversation a soothing backdrop to my racing thoughts. Julian was already there, sitting at a corner table, his tailored blazer hugging his broad shoulders, his dark hair catching the light as he looked up and met my gaze. "Lena," he said softly, his hazel eyes warm and reassuring, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips as he stood to greet me. I'm glad you could make it. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, my fingers twisting the strap of my bag as I tried to steady myself. I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about, I began, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest as I slid into the seat across from him, the warmth of the cafe doing little to calm the heat rising in my cheeks. And I need to be honest with you. Julian's eyes softened, a flicker of vulnerability in his expression as he leaned forward, his gaze never leaving mine. I'm listening, he said, his voice a low murmur that sent a shiver down my spine, his fingers resting on the table just inches from mine. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding as I met his gaze, the air between us charged with a quiet electricity. I'm not sure where this will lead, I said, my voice trembling with emotion, but I can't ignore how I feel. You've given me a lot to think about, Julian, and I've realized that what I want is to take that risk, not just with the job, but with you. His gaze softened further, a quiet relief washing over his features, and I saw a spark of something else. Desire, perhaps, or hope, that made my breath catch. You mean it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his fingers inching closer to mine, the heat of his presence making my skin tingle. I nodded, my heart racing, a quiet confidence settling within me. Yes, I said, my voice firm, a smile tugging at my lips. I mean it. There was a long silence as we sat there, the weight of the moment settling between us, a turning point that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Julian reached out, his hand brushing against mine, his touch warm and steady, his thumb tracing a slow, deliberate circle over my knuckles that sent a jolt of heat through me. It wasn't a grand gesture, but there was something deeply meaningful in the way he held my gaze, waiting for me to make the next move. I took a deep breath and leaned forward, the tension between us once thick with uncertainty, now feeling like a bridge leading us toward something neither of us could fully predict. Lena, Julian said, his voice a little more certain now, a quiet intensity in his eyes that made my pulse race. I never wanted to pressure you. I just needed you to know how I felt. I smiled, a warmth spreading through me, the heat of his touch lingering on my skin. I know, I replied softly, my fingers tightening around his. And I'm glad you did. His smile grew, genuine and warm, a quiet promise that made my chest ache. I don't know what the future holds for us, he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to wrap around me, pulling me closer. But I'm willing to find out. If you are. I nodded, a sense of peace washing over me, the uncertainty of the future no longer a source of fear, but a canvas of possibility. I am, I said, my voice steady, a quiet confidence settling within me. As we sat there, a mutual understanding passing between us, I realized that the real journey wasn't just about stepping into a new chapter with Julian. It was about embracing the uncertainty of life, allowing myself to be vulnerable, to connect, to grow. The weeks that followed weren't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the line between professional and personal felt blurry. But through it all, Julian and I maintained a mutual respect that anchored us. Our relationship, whether it remained professional or evolved into something more, was built on a foundation of trust and understanding. And for once in my life, I wasn't afraid of where it would take me.